Hello.
Our story continues inside the Chimera, where Mace Windu and Luke Skywalker woke up. Their bodies were sore. They felt weak in the head, but the first thing either of them did was check on each other. Young Skywalker was the first one to wake up, and he nudged Windu, which helped him reawaken. They looked around their surroundings. The bridge of the Chimera was no longer like a classic Star Destroyer bridge. The flooring was all black, the computer consoles no longer covered in a dreary gray tone. The Star Destroyer had been retrofitted to symbolize the change of the Imperial role. As they started to fully come back, they could overhear a delicate but maddening voice. He thanked the good doctor for his work, requesting that he inform the High Colonel of it. Thrawn stepped towards the two Jedi and called them out, both by name. He knew of Master Windu, his reputation preceded him, and young Skywalker was just the spitting image of his father. Thrawn had tasked the pirates with luring the Jedi in. What those pirates didn't know was Thrawn was setting them up to lose and die. He had enough of bartering with the pirates, and in an effort to kill two birds with one stone, he captured the Jedi threat and destroyed the insignificant legion of scum that had tried to capture his mind. The Grand Admiral introduced himself, seeing that neither of them had ever met him before. Thrawn wasn't much for gloating, but he informed them that their hope in restarting their lost order was gone. Their hope at defending the New Republic was a lost cause. The Imperial regime was the only entity worthy of maintaining balance and peace in the galaxy, because they had been so efficient at it for so long. He turned on a heel and the windows of the bridge illuminated with blue lanes. Thrawn explained that their powers and gifts would be used for the perfection of something far greater than either of them. Dr. Vindy would oversee their departure once he finished his experiments. Mace and Luke looked to each other, and this got the Grand Admiral to chuckle, informing them that there'd be no mistake. A master of the Order and a hero of the rebellion would not be escaping his sights. He assured them of that much, though he could promise that Dr. Vindy would be kind when it came to putting them down, at least for Luke. Nuvo had rotted away inside a Republic prison for 3 years. He might not be as kind to the Jedi who helped keep him locked away. Across the stars, R2 rushed into Leia's office. Little Ben Solo was inside. It was after school, and Han wanted to pay his lovely spouse a visit. He brought her some flowers in a vase, because why not? It was a sweet gesture, and sure, he often cringed at his softness, but there was something nice about opening up to somebody. Ben picked up on these frustrations lingering within his father's heart. They weren't malicious, but Solo couldn't let go of what he had seen and been through on Corellia. Ben just didn't know or understand his father's past. Regardless, when the astromech entered, they asked what was wrong, as he plugged into the port on her desk. What Luke and Mace didn't know was that R2 had been intercepted before the battle over Morak by the pirate fleet. Those same pirates didn't have any time to actually capture the astromech or see what was inside the ship they intercepted, so R2 was able to grab the footage of the Imperial fleet that arrived. It wasn't comparable to what was seen at Endor or Jakku, but the fact that they could fully prove Grand Admiral Thrawn returned with his Chimera clearly visible over the system. Leia had a strong argument now for defending the Alliance military. R2 didn't know about the capture that had taken place on the surface, but he had seen enough in his lifetime to confirm that something surely had happened to Luke and Mace. He was able to confirm the destruction of the pirate fleet and the effectiveness of the Imperial fleet present over Morak. However, as he was running through the information he had for Leia, he received an alert from a sensor Luke had on his belt. It was configured to look like a snack pack, but when it was tapped thrice, it would activate a distress signal. Luke's position, as well as the location of Thrawn's flagship, were revealed to Leia, Han, and Ben. Leia told Han to get into contact with General Syndulla's strike team. They needed to get out there immediately. Han was concerned with how this might affect both of their positions within the Republic, but Leia waved it off. If the Republic punished them for acting, then maybe this system wasn't savable. She grabbed Ben by the shoulder, telling him to stay put. The boy hugged his dad before Han rushed out of the room, following R2. Outside of the red honeycomb zone, the Chimera dropped out of hyperspace. In front of her were about a dozen other Star Destroyers. Grand Admiral Thrawn was conducting fleet exercises. Every attack and conflict was intentional. Thrawn turned towards the Marauders that had been stationed inside the bridge, and told them to transport these Jedi to Kaiza. She would instruct them from there. The two Jedi were picked up and eventually transported to a destroyed Clone War era vessel, nestled within the honeycomb. Luke and Mace felt true darkness, but what it was, they were unsure. It felt familiar to both of them, but such a reality felt unlikely. Once the prisoners were handed over, Kaiser, wearing the mask of Viceroy Exum Penchard, greeted them. She thanked the Marauders for coming so quickly. With them was the Doctor. They all turned back and watched as the Imperial fleet started to disperse. Thrawn was deploying these vessels to new base locations across the Outer Rim and unknown regions to fortify anything they needed. Dr. Vindy told Kaiser that these 3 Marauders were her gift. However, he was very excited to meet him. She flipped a little, her body contorted, before asking who he was. Vindy squinted his eyes, realizing that he had perhaps stepped out of place. She explained that the leaders of the Acolytes of the Beyond had crumbled. She was the leader of her own operation now. All power ran through her. This was semi-truthful, but the Acolytes were not what Vindy was asking about, and she knew that. More or less, she feared the Jedi knowing more than they needed to. She had the Marauders bring the 2 captured fools to the scientific bay within the vessel. They'd be placed onto beds, and the Doctor would begin his experimentation. He was instructed to steal the blood of Skywalker, and now that Mace was here, why not add to it? The benefits were numerous. Inside the Senate, following very closely in her mother's footsteps, Senator Organa Solo called together an emergency meeting. She had proof that the Empire was a larger threat than what had been previously believed. Leia framed her argument against Hamato Ziono, knowing that the senator from Hosnian Prime would challenge any proof she had of an Imperial resurgence. When she entered the Senate chambers, she faced the ridicule of her peers for bringing another false claim to their attention. But with genuine proof, like every previous time, and a Republic strike team that had confirmed the wreckage, it was right there. They also confirmed that there was Imperial personnel on the surface, so she was actually able to show off her evidence visually a lot more than she had previous times. The Senate had seen her make cases before them, and every time they made sure to reject them, which sucked for Mon Mothma. It made the current sitting Chancellor feel like she was wronging a friend, but in the best interest of the collective system, demilitarizing was the safest option. They had just been under a harsh aristocratic rule, with a military complex that pressed on the population. If the former alliance maintained a force of such power, they could create a feeling similar to what was felt under Imperial occupation. Leia's evidence, though, was proof enough to the people that they should fear the Empire. The problem is, the people who served within the Senate, and those who cared enough to actually listen in on this hearing outside of it, didn't care. It seemed superficial, a rare occurrence, not something that could absolutely threaten their existence. For people who served during the days of the rebellion, they heard this testimony and rejected the stance of the Republic. Princess Organa had been with them since day one, and if the Empire was threatening a return, in whatever form it might be, then they couldn't allow it to rise again. Complacency destroyed the Republic before. They could not allow ignorance to crush what had been rebuilt. Across the cosmos, at the same time, the Ghost and a number of other vessels departed out of hyperspace. These fighter craft exploded into an array of blaster fire, because the Imperial fleet present had detected them on their scanners. It was the rematch of the century for General Syndulla and Grand Admiral Thrawn. However, he had very little interest in showing off with the New Republic fighters. He didn't want to be in this engagement, and now he had to destroy these fools for imposing on his location. It forced Thrawn to dispatch every single fighter in the fleet, while dispersing the rest of the warships. The Star Destroyers that were meant for various bases and systems around these outlying territories dropped into hyperspace, as the main fighter assault continued. Hera pulled her ship around into the wreckage field where R2 told her the signal was coming from. Chopper confirmed the air quality was safe, and the bay door on the ship opened up. From it ran out Ezra, Han Solo, and R2. The Ghost lifted back off and fled into the combat to assist the other rebels with fighting Thrawn. His destroyer was holding well, and his fighters were keeping the rebels at bay, but he was uneasy about this. His eyes were peeled for any more space whales. Wherever Syndulla was, Bridger was not far behind, and he wouldn't be foolish enough to be outsmarted by a petulant child again. Good thing Ezra was with Han. They were moving through the facility. Stormtroopers stationed around the vessel moved in to stop the trio. Ezra took point with his saber, and Han's elite shot helped the Jedi fend off the incoming troopers. The two of them were a great team, as R2 whistled in excitement, telling them where to go. Firefights were always exciting to R2. The Mini-Maniac led them across the chambers. Speaking of Mini-Maniacs, Chopper detached the Phantom off the Ghost, per Hera's instruction, and started messing with Thrawn's head. He had obviously heard about Admiral Piet's death at Endor, which involved an A-wing smashing into the bridge. So Chopper was launching the Phantom towards the bridge of the Chimera and pulling up at the last second, because it was funny. Thrawn didn't think so, but Chopper definitely did. The fighter assault for the rebels was going pretty swell. Hera's squad was relatively elite, and with a few E-wings and B-wings sprinkled into the mix to spice up their assault, they were impossible to defend. With dwindling resources, the Remnant was stuck with the classic TIE fighters and interceptors, which were getting outclassed by the new X-wing variants, and pilots with official training. Thrawn used his turbo lasers, but they were ineffective. Not to mention, Chopper kept buzzing the bridge, causing constant disruptions to the crew. On the wreckage, Ezra and Mace broke down a door, revealing Luke and Mace, still lying on their tables. Dr. Vindy giggled, and when they broke in, he became angry, deploying the Marauders to kill them. Ezra told Han his brilliant plan, and just as the Marauders got their sabers ready, Ezra smiled and turned on a heel, bolting down the hallway. Han, who had already acted like he went a different way, snuck out behind the Marauders, who continued to chase the laughing Ezra away. Solo and R2 slipped into the room and fired at the stormtroopers, who were in there. 1, 2 shots, and they were down. A third shot closed the panel behind them. Ezra was on his own for the time being. Though Dr. Vindy asked if Han thought he was stupid, Solo was confused until another lightsaber ignited and slammed down in front of him. Kaiza was still here, defending the subjects, per her master's request. Han and R2 dispersed, preparing their own respective responses. Luckily for Luke and Mace, they hadn't been on the tables too long, but they had lost some blood. R2 moved towards the tables and turned them off, releasing Mace and Luke from the blood transfusions. Their bodies cocked back as a reaction. Solo rolled out of the way, firing at Kaiza, who blocked the shots with relative ease. Han continued looking for a way out of this. On the other hand, Ezra stopped and collided with his Marauder opponents. They seemed very happy to see him. He avoided strikes and defended where he needed to. Since returning from Peridia, he had taken some of his saber training a little more seriously. But at this point, Ezra was just a circus, winding around and around. He found great amusement in the frustration of these Sith warriors. His main goal was keeping them distracted, which he was doing a phenomenal job at. He paced their movements, but wasn't really able to get a strike in, so he searched for more ways to irritate them. Pushing 30 and not having grown up was a great advantage. He used the Force to shove one of them into the wall and cut a vent open, blasting the other two with smoke. You know when you're not supposed to be laughing in battle? Well, he couldn't stop. It was too funny. Mace Windu's eyes opened as he watched Solo roll out of the way again, barely avoiding a strike from Kaiza. R2 then zapped her, and she kicked him over, and just as she prepared to destroy him, she was flung into the wall. Windu rolled off the bed and slammed into the ground. Han fired into Kaiza's back, which hit her a couple times. Luke was able to get up, and he could see his old friend on the ground. Before he could help Mace, Kaiza flung her weapon across the chamber at Han, which Luke gripped with the Force and stopped. Han then fired his weapon at Kaiza, ripping the helmet off of her head, and she fell backwards. Her body started to contort with the removal of the mask. Just as Han almost fired again, Luke told him to stop. She wasn't evil. That mask had corrupted her. Mace told Luke to be careful as he pulled their sabers into his hands and tossed one at Skywalker. At the same time, he turned back and faced Dr. Vindy, who whined in fear. Han told Mace about Ezra and pointed his weapon at the door, telling the Jedi Master that he'd handle this. Windu nodded, tripping over his feet as he then moved out of the room. Luke got to Kaiza's side and raised his hand to her temple, sensing great agony from within. She had been a part of an acolyte cult, but that was a source of home, of belonging. Now she was controlled and manipulated by much more. If he could find the source, it could destroy the Sith, helping them get closer to defeating the Empire. Outside the room, a lineage separated by 2 generations met on the battlefield. Having not yet met his great-grand student, Mace flung a saber into the back of one of the Marauders. They crashed and fell over. Ezra was too busy tormenting them mentally to notice that Windu had arrived. He was a bit loopy, but Mace made it work. The Marauders challenged the Shatterpoint lineage, and the 2 Jedi locked in, Windu using Vapaa to defend himself from the rapidly approaching Sith creations. Ezra kick-flipped forward, launching his opponent off of their feet and into the back of the other, giving Mace the chance to accidentally decapitate both of them in one strike. Ezra then tripped over the bodies and laughed, asking the old man if he was alright. Mace's eyebrow lifted. This MFer called him an old man. Who in his right mind? He helped Ezra off the ground and asked who he was. They very quickly realized that they were a part of the same lineage, and Mace was horrified, but in a good way. Kaiza, on the other hand, wept. Her body convulsed. She was in pain. The Sith curse was strangling her, and she couldn't escape its nasty pull. But her choice wasn't to wallow. It was to free herself. Luke would help her with that. Outside of the wreckage, Thrawn's vessel would get clobbered by the blast of a B-wing cannon, cratering the shields. The Grand Admiral forfeited the assault, abandoning Exegol's system and returning to the main Imperial fleet outside of Ilum. The following few hours would consist of Ezra and Mace getting along, Chopper getting into a fistfight with R2, Kaiza's mind being probed, and the death of Palpatine. Unbeknownst to them, and even Thrawn, the Red Honeycomb Zone led to his Emperor. They were unaware of how close to Palpatine they were. Kaiza was situated there because of Palpatine, and Dr. Vindy was meant to bring Luke and Mace to the Sith Temple once he extracted their DNA and their blood. But that never happened. It was essentially to prevent either Jedi from escaping and killing Palpatine. If Luke didn't have his distress signal, everything would have worked out, and Sidious would have remained an elusive threat. But he was unplugged by Luke and Mace, thus killing the last of the Sith. The Final Order fleet would be revealed to the New Republic, and it would be destroyed before General Syndulla's task force left Exegol. Months following the destruction of Sidious, the New Republic was in shambles. The demilitarization of the Alliance Navy was a failure. Dock workers, military personnel, and vets of the old war refused to allow it to happen through protests. This created a secession movement within the Senate led by Hamata Ziono, and it was backed by the Imperial Senate Old Guard, i.e., individuals who served the Senate under Palpatine's leadership. It was the corrupt generation versus the go-getters, and thus unnecessary tension was born. During this same span of time, Leia was almost pushed out of the Senate when her lineage was revealed. She was connected back to Vader, and when calls for her resignation landed on her desk, due to rivalries within the Republic, she was defended by Windu. The account that someone could be judged by the character of their parent wasn't proper. Mace suggested that if they were going to judge Leia on her father Vader, then they should judge her also on her mother, calling Padme one of the finest senators of her time. However, the character of Leia Organa Solo wasn't founded in complacency. It was in public service. She fought the Empire, the same one her father upheld. If anyone could stand for the notion that she should resign based on lineage, then he wished to see the resignation of every senator who willingly stood by while Palpatine destroyed the galaxy. The sentiment was nice, and it saved Leia's seat within the Senate, but it created even more distrust of the Jedi. They were back to their warmongering ways in the public eye. But Mace didn't care. Leia needed to remain in the Senate, so she stayed, and the New Republic military mobilized. Old destroyers were taken apart and reused for scrap and new vessels for the new Navy. Most of these ships were redesigned MC-class cruisers and destroyers. They simply had better firepower and shields. It was a simple upgrade that would outclass whatever the Remnant had. These were not the same vessels that were used by the New Republic as patrol ships. Inversely, due to all the change within the Republic on Coruscant, the warlords united under Thrawn started to break. His loss at the Red Honeycomb Zone was a big reason why the New Republic was able to militarize. If the Remnant could build what they built at Exegol, then what else was out there, essentially? General Syndulla's and every other pilot's tape from the battle depicted a fragile Imperial remnant that needed to be fought. There was almost a coup on Thrawn, but High Colonel Pride stopped it. He was a trusted loyalist of their cause, and he believed in Thrawn. This allowed the Remnant to strengthen themselves, and in a means to prepare for real war, Captain Paleon grouped up the syndicates, aligning the former Empire with the Black Suns, the Zahn Consortium, the Pike Syndicate, Crimson Dawn, and the fledgling Hutt Cartel. Following Jabba's death, the Hutts were struggling immensely, so they were in. The Jedi, despite the divisiveness they caused within the Senate, continued to move along freely. Mace genuinely adored Ezra, but Bridger didn't spend a whole lot of time with the Jedi, because he was a Boken Jedi. His role wasn't going to be a part of the regrowing order. Mace was assisting Luke with rebuilding his anyways, but instead of relying so heavily on the past, it was time to focus on the future. It seemed ironic, based on Windu's reputation, but he actually became quite disgruntled with how Ben Kenobi and Yoda treated Luke. They just passed their burdens onto him, and didn't do anything to help in Mace's own eyes. Anakin was a good father, and was present when he could be, but he also couldn't tell Luke what to do, as it would disrupt time and kind of just hurt everything overall. Perhaps the same could be said about the other two Jedi, but for the Force's sake they were alive long enough to say, hey, don't dedicate your life to finding relics. Yoda's message of pass on what you learned was great, Mace agreed, but Ben Kenobi saying true from a certain point of view was kind of rude. Mace had Luke's back, though, which is really the main point. Master Skywalker didn't have to take a seat because in Mace's eyes, he was the future the Jedi Order needed. The two of them, instead of being present for the mobilization of the New Republic military, were out on Korriban. What they didn't know was the New Republic arrogantly got prepared to rinse the remnant. There were charter cruises for people to pay for, so they could grab some drinks, some food, and gamble while the Republic won the war. It would be a horrid show, and it would prove what kind of threat Thrawn was. Equipped with older weapons and weaker vessels, and also ships provided by the syndicates, Thrawn absolutely whooped the Republic fleet under the command of some Academy head from West Coruscant. The battle took place on the Manassas Belt, not far from the Rishi Maze, and it was a horrible loss. Before the Jedi learned about this, they were on Korriban though. They were going into the Sith Temple to ensure the Sith were actually fully dead. As they entered, they ignited their sabers. They scanned for sight of any open tombs. The whole encounter with Sidious triggered their own respective traumas from seeing him. Funnily, both involved getting electrocuted by old Palpy. Mace and Luke, two Jedi Masters, ventured deep into the Sith Temple. They used their sabers to light their way. As they got into the heart of the temple, they were faced with the Crimson Saber, one that echoed out across the chambers. They couldn't believe that yet another Sith had returned, somehow. Mace told Luke that they would do this together, and they prepared for another engagement. This individual could be saved, and Luke hoped that, like Kaiza, they could bring another former Sith to Ossus and save them. But once their duel began, something became readily apparent. They weren't fighting a real opponent. The duelists collided back and forth across the eerie chambers, but they resulted in very little change. And it was at this moment where Mace told Luke to stop. Their weapons deignited, and the Sith struck at them, before fading into dust. Before they continued, an apparition rose from the ground. Darth Bane, the same Sith Lord who had encountered Yoda more than 30 years before, was present. He was weaker, feeble, and coughing. Bane admitted that it was a good run. The Jedi were confused, preparing to point their weapons at him. He explained that with Sidious's death, their religion was gone. There was no one to carry the burden. Kai's betrayal of their ways had doomed them. Bane explained that the last of them had vanished into time. He was the final Sith apparition on Korriban, withering away. He expressed to them that even with his hatred of their putrid cause, he had to give it to them. They had been destroyed, and through the depths of hell, the Jedi found their way to return and defeat the greatest of the Sith. It was truly an accomplishment. Maybe the Sith were gone, but he had to congratulate someone before he let go. Thousands of years of existence, and they had done a pretty good job, but it seems they were simply outmatched by an adversary they never even considered to be equal to them. Truly some irony in that. Bane hissed, telling the Jedi that they were a worthy opponent. May the Force be a stepping stone for their success in the future. It was the closest the two of them would get to a "May the Force be with you," but it was kind of nice. They would abandon Korriban, confirming that the Sith were gone, watching the temple crumble in on itself, and with its collapse was a significant end of the Sith. When they returned to Ossus, they'd be greeted by Kaiza, who was thriving. Her natural hair color was glimmering, her face was warm, and she was filled with a love for life. This was the beauty of what Luke was establishing. It was something Mace Windu fully believed in, and he saw, here, that what became of the future Jedi was built around Master Skywalker. Kaiza would have never survived the Old Order, like Dooku didn't, but Dooku could have been saved by a Luke Skywalker. At the new temple grounds, they would learn about the loss at Manassas Belt, and how the Republic was shocked over the result. Those who were onlooking couldn't believe what they had seen. They returned to the core in terror over their terrible loss. Mace told Luke to make a decision. He would support him and give him ideas as he decided on what the Jedi would do. Out on Hosnian Prime, Han Solo walked out of a cell frustrated again. The New Republic tasked Han with getting information from Dr. Vindy, but he didn't have anything worth sharing. He served Thrawn, who served Palpatine. The Marauder clones were simply created by using the dead bodies of those salvaged from the wreckage of the Fortress Inquisitorius on Nur. He'd been serving the Emperor's Necromancer project from Jakku, up until he was saved by High Colonel Pride. But Nuvo didn't know anything else regarding the Remnant, because Thrawn kept him out of meetings. Sadly for Han Solo, he thought that Vindy was lying. He was telling the truth though. The loss at Manassas Belt had the Republic Senate scrambling in terror. This had proven Leia right, which made the secession movement look even more fraudulent. It was actually such a jarring loss that several committees had been disbanded. Planets across the New Republic called for resignations, forcing many secessionist senators to lose their seats in favor of cooperative politicians that would defend the Republic and stand up to imperial threats, regardless of how unrealistic they sounded. This shift delayed Republic movement for days, giving the Remnant a chance to declare war on some outlying systems, like Ryloth, Christophsis, and Rhodia, all of which falling. Due to the Remnant teaming up with the Syndicates, establishing control over these systems became really easy. Each of these groups were very against the New Republic, because they didn't work in unison with them, like the Empire did. Thrawn exploited these Syndicates for their manpower. This was honestly the thrill of Thrawn's career. He hadn't ever been an underdog, at least not in over a decade. Very infrequently was he underprepared, and now that Palpatine was gone, he could fill his ranks with officers that would actually do what he told them to do. This assault on the galaxy was intended to cripple morale. These weak and undefended systems across the outer edges of Republic territory were quick victories, and every planet to fall to Remnant control was another lost voice within the Senate. It demoralized the victorious Alliance forces quickly, and thus, the Republic moved to isolate these attacks. Despite how things looked from the outside, the Jedi were looking at things from a different perspective. They could see something familiar, something a Clone War vet picked up on. Mace Windu remembered the attacks at the neutral system of Mandalore. They didn't just come out of thin air. Darth Maul had worked arduously to bring together a shadow collective of pirate syndicates and challenged the royal house of Kryze. They won through overpowering them, and he believed that the Imperial Remnant was doing the same thing here. Their strategy was intelligent, but a firm stop could rebuild the morale of the Republic freedom fighters. Kyza therefore was the first Jedi to move into the Outer Rim Syndicate territory. She would work undercover with R2-D2. At the same time, members of the Ghost crew, including Zeb, Ezra, and Kallus, would sneak into Imperial bases that had been located by scouts or loyalists to the Republic. It was kind of weird. Despite the Republic being the established power in the galaxy, they still had to use Alliance-era tactics to win this. Their fighting force was impressive, but they needed to have knowledge as a weapon. Before Luke or Mace left the planet of Ossus, they'd have a short visit from Anakin Skywalker's Force Ghost. He was overjoyed to see them, and prideful in their accomplishments this far into the rebirth of the Jedi Order. He told them both that the conclusion of this war came from unlikely allies. They would find their greatest gifts in those they least align with, reminding them to trust the guidance of the Force. It was the life force of the universe. It would lead them towards maintaining the balance that had once again been established in the downfall of the Sith. The Remnant and its allies were just another chapter in the rhyming waves of galactic history. The two Jedi thanked Anakin for checking in on them, and he told them that they mustn't thank him, for their gratitude would be best spent on themselves. It was their work that had changed the galaxy for the better. Away from the mysticism of the Force, more combat erupted, mostly in space. While Thrawn didn't have the technology or resources to continue building new Star Destroyers, or innovate that tech, he was able to return to a more powerful fighter idea. Because he knew that the fighter fight was the key to beating the Republic, resources went into new TIE models, including the two-seater TIE variant and of course, his beloved TIE Defender. Now, the Defender was an incredible vessel, but without proper funding or resources, it would never be as powerful as the variant he had created over a decade before. Though upon their rapid completion, based off of old specs, they would be effective against New Republic pilots. The space battles between the Republic and the Remnant were tense, and the additional reinforcements from the Syndicates were incredibly valuable. An even more crucial part to their campaign were the raids led by the pirates. This was also an indicator to Thrawn that not everything he established was necessarily working through him. These pirate raids also crippled morale for the Republic, but they also technically weren't victories for the Imperial Remnant. None of this was known to the New Republic. They only saw the flag of the Remnant raised over these systems, which cleared the syndicates from any responsibility. However, the response that came from the core was much more than the Imperial regime could prepare for. Into hyperspace went dozens of capital ships, veteran crews from Coruscant, Jakku, and Endor, loaded up and launched themselves at the Outer Rim. As the war between the Imperial Resistance and Reborn Alliance heated up, news was floated back to the government of the New Republic. They were informed, first by Kaiser, then by a number of other rebel forces, that there were interconnectedness between the syndicates and the Remnant. When this information reached Senator Organa Solo, she preached to generals of the military of a new strategy. All of these leaders, aside from the academy heads that had half a decade to read about things she did, respected her. Those who were a part of the Alliance, and most importantly, the Admiral of the Republic Fleet, were willing to listen. Leia believed that they could fund a Phantom Fleet, mimic what the Emperor did at Endor, and then strike the Remnant where it hurt. This strategy would therefore be implemented. When the conflict between these major factions came to a head, with an Imperial push for Mid-Rim territory at Naboo, everything changed. At a crucial juncture in the war, with a multitude of Republic territory across the edge of the Mid-Rim lost, Naboo was reported as the stronghold of the New Republic to Imperial spies. Thrawn was moving in to counter it. At the same time as his move on Naboo, multiple Republic fleets dropped into the Outer Rim. As both Thrawn's First Fleet and the Republic fleets were in transit, the syndicates came together to betray the Remnant. Similar to how Thrawn betrayed the pirates over Morak, they were going to do the same thing to him. This wasn't even about his actions against those pirates. None of them cared. This action came from the desire to manipulate control over the Outer Rim territories secured by the Remnant during this miniature war. The reason they wanted to get away with this is because no one attributed the success of the Remnant to the syndicates. Therefore, they could capture all the Outer Rim territory they had captured thus far, leaving the Remnant to be butchered by the New Republic for their crimes against humanity. Thrawn had trust these pirates because of what they could provide him in the short run. He knew that they could never technologically stand up to the destroyer fleet that he had. But as Thrawn prepared to strike a Phantom Fleet at Naboo, the syndicates moved to betray their Imperial allies. So not only was Thrawn's First Fleet preparing to enter unoccupied airspace, but the criminals were blindsiding the Remnant defense points. And on top of that, the New Republic was bouncing down the throat of the criminal syndicates. Leia's strategy to pull Thrawn in worked, and the New Republic wouldn't actually challenge Thrawn over Naboo. As they would learn to come as their counter-campaign began, they wouldn't need to challenge Thrawn as directly as they initially believed they would. The greedy move made by the syndicates backfired on both the Imperial Remnant and on themselves, because if they hadn't acted for control over the Outer Rim, they would have at least had the support of the Remnant to assist them, but now there was nothing. They couldn't protect themselves from the various Republic fleets. On top of that, they were so thinly spread out that actually fighting the Republic forces would be their end. Thanks in part to the Jedi, there were sabotages across Syndicate leadership, and thus created a sequence of events that turned them against each other. The few days following the attempt to destroy the Republic at Naboo would see a complete changing of the Guard. Luke, Mace, and Kaiser would strike at the heart of Crimson Dawn, while Ezra, Zeb, and Kallus would take an elite squad of rebels into Pike Syndicate territory on Obadiah. There would be major skirmishes, and the assault on the Remnant would become an elongated chase, one taking the longer part of a month. General Syndulla and Admiral Akbar hunted down Thrawn and destroyed him. Similar to the battle at Manassas Belt, it would be broadcasted for everyone to see, and this time it would be a heroic victory. Admiral Akbar's Home One ripped the Chimera apart after she, on her last legs, attempted to flee. Prior to this victory, there was a very small sense of patriotism across the New Republic. Following it, civilians across the galaxy would be in arms together as one united system. They had defeated the Empire once, and after flailing into the pitfalls of trying to restart a democracy, they found themselves in a common enemy. Systems that had faced the wrath of the Remnant across the Outer and Mid-Rims were the leaders of this patriotic movement. They heralded in the hope that the people of the core wished to see, and the Senate responded accordingly, rolling out banners, blasting off fireworks, and celebrating the culmination of a generation's work to eviscerate evil. This was their moment to enjoy, their moment to celebrate, and they would, because they had brought peace to the Republic once again. Taking over the former Syndicate territories would take years of work, and weeding out the piracy and corruption would take decades. But with the Remnant encouraging the Republic to burst into this territory, it only encouraged the Republic to make the change. Because of everything that had transpired, Mon Mothma's successor would be Senator Leia Organa Solo. She, as her mother would have decades before, inspired people. Leia's position at the top of the New Republic government would be the first stepping stone to creating a united galaxy, a mission that had been started time and time again, but only seeing its first sign of completion under Leia's administration. All the while, outside of her successes and change to the galaxy, there were the Jedi. Masters Skywalker and Windu helped secure the Outer Rim, and their continued efforts would be recognized by the Chancellor. But now, it was time to begin rebuilding the Jedi. Luke was ready, and Windu believed in him. Among the students brought into their new academy would be young Ben Solo. It was believed that he would make a fine Jedi, and Mace would have the honor of training him. The first generation welcomed into the Order would have an unlikely friend. The galaxy was filled with people inspired by the Force, individuals who wished to learn of its great mystery. The journey of a man who had been fascinated by the Force had been corrupted by the Sith. But when that Sith died, when their religion was extinguished, that same man continued his pursuit of knowledge in the Force, and thus it led him to Ossus. Mace Windu would be the first to greet Snoke. He was a creation of Palpatine, just like a granddaughter hidden out amongst the stars. But because Snoke wasn't forced to do Palpatine's bidding, he found himself allured by the Jedi way, and he eventually, through some training, would become one of the many Jedi Elders. By the time the Dyad was a part of the new Jedi Order, there had been great change within it. Snoke, Windu, Kaiza, and Skywalker were the makings of a new Jedi Council, but they never called themselves a council. They were the Masters of the Order, named in honor of the inspiration Mace Windu had given Luke during their journeys together. Several years into the creation of the new Order, another face would come along, following in her older brother's footsteps. Jannah Solo, thanks to the encouragement from her father, became a member of the Order. She had many to be inspired by, and Jannah would have great success within the Jedi sect. Her older brother, Ben Solo, would thrive under Mace's instruction. This would inspire Luke to thrive as a leader of the Order. Though during their time together, Mace and Ben would be approached by a Force ghost. The times had changed, but there were many things that Windu and Skywalker could have accomplished had they communicated long ago. Maybe it could have changed things, maybe not. All were what-ifs of a time that had come and gone. But for the foreseeable future, and for the rest of their lives, they would see the Force shimmering with light, not seen since the golden days of the Republic. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to the patrons: Daniel Wells, Ozpin, Angel Dust, Alexandra Reese, The Beginning and End, Jack Silver, Prismatic Warlock Master, Lyndall Asher, Schmoobs, There Are Cars, Darth Vitiate, Seju Jagger, Groot 36, Hunter Belden, Rosebird, General Alexander, Robin Roberts, Blackie Chan, Django Fat Clone, Nick 5098, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Puramark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tibbs, CC2024, Galvin Gaming, Tristan, Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Brandon D. Bane, Laliant, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo Weewo 670, Annika Stink Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Knox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Johnny DeGuin, Sansa Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Calic, Youngling Slayer 66, Man Manu Studios, Anakin 003, Lord Draken, Ford's Legacy Star Wars, Erebus, Rex the Wolf, The Man of Three First Names, Darkseid 46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing. For supporting the channel, smash that like button. Let's talk about this story. So, something I've been wanting to do, you guys know I love making the sequel stories. What I wanted to do here is I wanted to combine attributes of sequels for Legends and canon, but also parts of the original ideas George Lucas had for the sequels. Obviously, his rendition also had Luke going into hiding, and this takes place long before the time frame of the sequels, but it has a lot of ideas that are very present within Legends, canon, and George Lucas sequels, and that's kind of what I wanted to do. I wanted to combine all of them into one. So you still have the Dyad, you still have Rey and Ben, you also have Jannah Solo, you have the fight with the Remnant, you have the Zan Consortium, all that kind of stuff. And that was all kind of like a big culmination. But with this story specifically, I wanted to use the Impure Remnant instead of like the First or Final Order. I didn't want to get to that point where it was First Order yet. So it's like the building block, something that we're probably going to see in the Mandalorian Grogu movie, the building blocks of the First Order. That's what I'm looking to see here. And then kind of combining that with the pirate aspect. And also, shout out to the Dr. Vindy. That was... I saw him and I was like, he needs to be in the story. And using him for making some Sith Marauders was fun. So I hope you all enjoyed this story. I love you all, spread the love, and always, my friends, may the Force be with you.